So we are in the, we have set up Lorentz transformations, and we also discussed the velocity addition rule that's followed in special relativity. So just to quickly realize, the two postulates of special relativity are all laws of physics, and this, and it doesn't say all laws of just classical mechanics, but it is all laws of physics, okay, are invariant in form between inertial frames. This is the special of the special relativity refers to the particular case of inertial frames, and this name is obviously in anticipation of a more general scenario which includes even the non-inertial frames, which we will take up for a qualitative discussion in the next class. And then the second postulate is that of the law of constancy of the speed of light in vacuum. Speed of light in vacuum is the same for all inertial observers, for all inertial frames. Okay, so these are the two postulates, and we saw how these two postulates give rise to all the consequences that set up the mathematical uh, foundation for the theory of relativity. And in the previous class, we looked at some consequences: length contraction. And what is length contraction? The measured length of a moving rod. The measured length of a moving rod is frame dependent. Okay, this is the relativity of measurements of length, and usually it is smaller in all frames where the rod is moving. Okay, so there is a proper frame in which the rod has a certain length when the rod is at rest. In all other frames where the rod is moving, they measure usually a smaller length. So L prime will be 1 by gamma. So let's write it. It'll be L naught by gamma. This will be L naught square root of 1 minus v squared by c squared. And time dilation is the effect where we gave a moving clock is seen to be running slow. Okay, this is the simple phrase which you can remember, that a moving clock is seen to be running slow. Now this, the time interval, if in the rest frame of the clock, if at certain time interval delta t elapses between two events A and B, in another frame for the same two events A prime and B, A and B, delta t prime will be gamma times delta t. Okay, and gamma is anyway 1 by square root of 1 minus v squared by c squared. Okay, so this is the effect of time dilation. Now, at the end of last class, I gave a quick exercise and we evaluated the velocity addition rule, that the correct velocity addition rule is if you have a frame in which, let's call it S, and you have another frame S prime, this is T prime, and you have an object here which is, we have an object here which is moving with a velocity u with respect to S, and let us say the same object is measuring with a velocity u prime with respect to S prime, then u prime, and if this is moving with a velocity v, in this direction. This is x, this is x prime, and this v is also along the x direction. That is an important criterion while we did this derivation, and we found that u is nothing but u minus v by 1 minus uv by c squared, right? But this formula, this is valid only when u v are along the same direction. Okay, that is the assumption. What if they are not? So the simplest case would be, let's consider a particle. Okay. Okay. Let's consider a particle that has a component of velocity ux and a component of velocity uy. Okay. I asked you to do this as an exercise, but let us quickly evaluate it. So you have another frame S prime in which the same particle will be seen to be measuring, will be measured to be moving with a velocity component ux prime and uy prime. And we want to know what are ux prime and uy prime. And we know that ux prime is going to be ux minus v, and for simplicity we will take v to be along the x direction. So ux minus b by 1 minus ux v by c squared. This we know exactly from the previous, from this formula. This is exactly what we know. What about uy prime? What is uy prime? According to Newtonian relativity, uy prime will be equal to uy. Does anybody have any objection to this statement? Because the motion is along x direction, uy prime should be the same as uy, right? But you have to be true to the method in which you measure a velocity. What is the fundamental method in which you measure a velocity? You measure displacement over a certain interval of time and you take the ratio of those. So if you don't know a priori what the formula for uy prime will be, and you are hesitating to make the claim that it's going to be exactly like the Newtonian case, you have to basically derive it. Let us derive it now. So in special relativity, uy prime will be basically delta y prime by delta t prime. This is the definition of a component of velocity. If a particle moves from, let us say, y2 prime minus y1 prime in a time t2 prime minus t1 prime, that would be the uy prime. Okay. But from Lorentz transformations, we know that y2 prime minus y1 prime will be y2 minus y1 as long as the motion between the two frames, the relative motion of the two frames, is along the x direction. Anik, you have a question? Ah, okay. So as long as the motion is along the x direction, y2 prime is equal to y2 even in special relativity. So the numerator will still be the same, but you can now see that t2 prime minus t1 prime will not be the same. T2 prime minus t1 prime will actually be t2 minus, okay, beta by c x2 minus t1 minus beta by c x1 gamma gamma. This we know from Lorentz transformations. This is using Lorentz transformations. This is how the time, if t1 and t2 are the times measured in the first frame for two events, t2 prime and t1 prime will be those in the second frame, and the transformation is given by this. And you can now see that this is no longer, this is 1 by gamma times y2 minus v1 You have a T2 minus T1 here. Had this been the only term in the denominator, maybe you have some hope of recovering the Newtonian formula, but you also have this beta by C, x2 minus x1 sitting here. So what you get if you divide the numerator and denominator by T2 minus T1, you get 1 by gamma uy, because y2 minus y1 by T2 minus T1 is uy by definition, divided by 1 minus beta by C ux. Okay, so we can write this as, this will be uy square root of 1 by v squared by c squared divided by 1 minus uxv by c squared. Now why is this an issue? What you suddenly observe is uy prime is not equal to uy, but it is equal to uy times square root of 1 minus v squared by c squared by 1 minus uxv by c squared. It has a rather complicated formula. So therefore, the velocity that the moving frame measures will not be the transformation is non-trivial and one has to work it out. When ux is 0, that is if in the frame S a particle is actually moving along the y direction and the frame S prime, this is frame S, and the frame S prime is moving along the x direction with respect to S, then this particle here, if this has a velocity uy, then uy prime will be uy square root of 1 minus v squared by c squared. Okay, because ux is 0, the x component of the velocity in the other frame. In this frame, the x component ux is 0. Therefore, uy prime will be this. And ux, can somebody tell me what is ux prime in the second frame? Quickly. What is ux prime for this particle in the second frame?
Minus v.
Exactly. It's minus v, right? Because the particle is moving along. You can verify this, right? So it has to be minus v. So this is how the velocities transform. Now let us see how this transformation of velocities has a very important consequence. Okay, and that is you need to redefine momentum. How, you may ask? So it goes as follows. Let us do a thought experiment. Okay, let's consider two frames. All thought experiments in relativity involve two frames. So let's just consider two frames, S and S prime, and S prime is moving with some velocity v relative to S. Okay. Now consider, I'm going to consider a rather contrived example of a two-body collision. Okay. Conservation of momentum. Okay. Conservation of momentum is a fundamental principle. This is the premise. We know that conservation of momentum is a fundamental principle, and Newtonian relativity already shows that it is valid between inertial frames, and according to Einstein's conjecture hypothesis, it has to be true for all inertial frames, even in the case of special relativity, because we have extended the validity of relativity principle not just to mechanics but to all physics, and conservation of momentum is a fundamental principle of mechanics. So this will, This has to be true. Let's now consider a two-body collision which looks like this. In S, I will write it separately. Let us say there are two equal masses of value m, and okay, we are now this mass, one mass, we'll call it A, is moving along the y direction. So this is the x and this is the y direction with some velocity uy. Okay, and the other mass is moving along mass B is moving along the x direction with a velocity ux, but along the y direction with a velocity minus uy. Okay, this is minus uy. Those of you who are keenly following will already notice why I chose one particle to be moving purely along the uh, y direction. This is so when you consider two body collisions, you usually consider two. I mean, the most trivial example would be both the bodies moving along the same axis. And if you now observe it from two frames, which are also moving relatively along the same direction, you will see that the conservation of momentum principle holds even in that case, and there is no problem. But it is when you involve both x and y movements, you will see in a minute that the conservation of momentum principle is no longer valid if you apply the relativistic transformation of the x and y components of velocities that we just discussed. Okay, so let us see how that happens. So in order to not spend time on the trivial case, which is both bodies moving in the same direction, we are now considering a slightly non-trivial case. And what happens in this scenario is the arrangement is such that this body is moving along this direction, this body is moving along this direction, and they both collide. Then because of the particular scenario that we chose, that uy is actually the same, the both bodies have exactly the same momentum in opposite directions along the y direction. This body, and they have the same masses, this body will come back with some velocity, with the same velocity. In fact, let's also make it very simple and say it's an elastic collision. So after the collision, this body will bounce back with the same velocity, and this body will also bounce back with the same y component of the velocity, and the x component remains completely unaffected in the process. So this is the collision process that we are going to analyze in the light of special relativity. And we know exactly how to analyze this in the Newtonian case. So we are not going to do that. In the Newtonian case, let us say if we have another frame S prime, and for simplicity, let us assume, okay, let's make this, sorry, let's make this 2x, 2ux. I'll tell you why. Let us say this is 2ux, 2ux, and let us say this frame S prime is moving with v equal to ux. Okay, then in the frame S prime, according to Newtonian relativity, according to Newton, this is what the process will look like. So this particle, the y components of velocities don't change, obviously. So this is moving with minus uy, but since the frame is moving to the right with a velocity ux, this particle will now move to the right with a velocity ux instead of with 2ux. And this particle, on the other hand, this is particle B. Particle A, on the other hand, will be moving in this direction with ux and in this direction with uy. So it's a perfectly symmetric collision where two particles come and collide like this. Okay, they come like this and they just collide and go. Like this is a perfectly symmetric case as observed in this special frame that we chose with this property that V is Ux. It's a completely symmetric case, and the total initial momentum in both directions is evidently conserved, because the total momentum in the x direction is 0. The total momentum in the y direction is 0 in this case. So both before and after collision, it's conserved. In this case, the total x momentum is 2mux. That doesn't change, so that is conserved. The value of the x momentum is frame dependent, so that changes. But the fact that it is conserved remains the same. And the y momentum, the net y momentum before and after collision remains 0. So in both frames, you come to the conclusion that conservation of momentum holds. But if you now apply the relativistic transformation, which is the correct transformation of velocities, you will see that this is not the case. Okay. Now this is a very important observation, because okay, so we won't be doing the entire calculation. Let us just try to compute. Let us consider this particular case. This is the case in S. Okay. Now let us look at S prime according to special relativity, according to Einstein. That was according to the previous analysis was according to Newton. Now according to Einstein, in S, the collision is happening like this. Okay. So the two bodies are essentially, this is moving with minus uy, this is going with uy. This is how it is in S. That doesn't change. That scenario doesn't change. Now when you go to S prime, let's call this u, this is B, this is A. Okay. Let us say ua y prime and ua x prime are the two x components before the collision for the A particle, and ub y prime and ub x prime are the x and y components for the B particle before the collision. And let us say va y prime and va x prime, va x prime, then vb y prime and vb x prime are the velocities after the collision. Let's now try to see what these velocities look like. Okay, the simplest is of course particle A, because particle A has no x movement, and we already know that that's a relatively easier case to transform the y component of velocity. So ua y prime in that case will be uy square root of 1 minus v squared by c squared, where v is this velocity. Okay, and what about uax prime? Uax prime will be minus v, right? Because we are considering, yeah, this particular scenario. Now let us also consider the same scenario in both cases. So let us take v equal to, let me write this as, this is moving with 2ux, let us say, yeah. Let's not even bother with the 2, because the 2 was a consequence of the relativistic, the Newtonian velocity transformation rule. Let us just keep it as v. It's okay for now. Okay, and uax prime will be minus v. That's not going to change. And what about uay prime? Now, what about the uby prime? What about for the B particle? The B particle is moving with respect to the x direction. So uby prime will be uby, okay, uby, whatever the component of uby is, which is basically minus uy, square root of 1 minus v squared by c squared divided by 1 minus ubxv by c squared. This would be the transformation. You can already see that these two frames will not agree. Okay, these two frames will not agree with each other that the y components of the two velocities are the same. Okay, so there is already some disagreement, but that is not really anything serious, because obviously we cannot expect two frames to agree on the measured values of some component or some quantity. We all know that measured values are frame dependent. So that itself is not a problem. But what will be a problem is you can do this exercise and you can ubx prime is easy. It'll just be ubx minus v by 1 minus ubx v by c squared. By the way, this is not prime, that's ubx times velocity. So I'll just remove the extraneous thing because that's confusing. Yeah. Okay. And now what about u v a y prime? We know that in this frame, in the S frame, okay, we know that in the S frame, the particle is basically coming back with minus uy. So Vay prime has to be, this is basically minus uy square root of 1 minus v squared by c squared by 1 minus ubx v by c squared, right? Vay prime will be minus uy again, square root of 1 minus v squared by c squared divided by 1 minus, that's it. Yeah, that's it. That's because there is no x movement as seen in the S frame. All right. So this is the Vay prime. Let us now look at what is Vby prime. We know Vby prime as measured in the S frame. It is moving up with a velocity uy. So this will be uy square root of 1 minus v squared by c squared, and it's moving in the S frame horizontally with a velocity ubx v by c squared. Now let us see if we use m times vb prime y plus m times va prime y should be equal to m times ub prime uby, sorry, ub prime y plus m times ub uay prime. So this is necessarily, it has to be true because the conservation of momentum has to hold in both frames. If you just write down the expressions, uy square root of 1 minus v squared by c squared divided by 1 minus ubx v by c squared, this is uby prime plus m times vay prime will be minus uy square root of 1 minus v squared by c squared. That's it. There is no denominator, equal to m, sorry, yeah, m uby prime is this, which is exactly minus uy square root of 1 minus v squared by c squared by 1 minus ux v by c squared, right? That is this. And we need uay prime. Uay prime is trivial, so that's going to be plus m uy square root of 1 minus v squared by c squared. And you can very easily see that this is not zero, meaning this is not equal. In fact, you get the right hand side is the negative of the left hand side, right? Do you notice that? The right hand side is not equal to the left hand side, it's the negative of the left hand side. That's just a detail, but in any case, you don't see that the momentum is conserved in this particular case. Now, this is a big red flag. Where are things going wrong? Now, this analysis is not difficult, but it's also going to take time. But ultimately, the answer that Einstein arrived at is he asked a very simple question. In all of classical physics, okay, all the dimensions of physical quantities in classical mechanics, all physical quantities have dimensions of m power alpha, l power beta, t power gamma, where alpha, beta, gamma are some real numbers. M, L, and T are the three fundamental units, and you don't need anything else in classical mechanics to specify any quantity. Be it so mass, length, and time are the three fundamental quantities which give the dimensions to all other quantities. Right? Is this point acceptable to everyone? I'm not talking about electrodynamics, where charge is also involved, but classical mechanics. Take anything, for example, angular momentum, moment of inertia, center of mass coordinates. They are all essentially some sort of coordinate, or all quantities involve some notions of mass, length, or time. Right? So Einstein just looked at this and said, wait a minute, conservation of momentum doesn't hold if you analyze it from the relativistic formula, but we want it to hold no matter what formalism you use. And then he asked the question, if length and time are relative, why can't mass be relative? Okay, if L and T are already frame dependent, are relative, right? According to Newton, L and T are absolute. That is, a length L in one frame is the same length L in any frame. A time interval T in one frame is the same time interval in all frames. Similarly, when we analyzed this case of two particles colliding, we made an implicit assumption that the masses of the two particles are not changing. What Einstein asked was, why can't mass change when you move from one frame to another frame, when length and time can also change? So why not mass? And then after a little algebra, he figured out that if m depended on the movement of the body instead of being the same as the body, for example, length, a moving rod and a static rod in any given frame have different behaviors. The measured length of a static rod, oops, uh, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
For some reason, my Wi-Fi has just hold on for a second. My iPad lost its connection, so I'm writing here, but it's not updating. My computer is fine. Okay. Uh, I think it has now stopped broadcast, so I'll come back in just a second. Hello, can you hear me? Hello. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So the question that Einstein asked was if a rod of length L, if it is static in a frame, you measure the length to be L, but once it starts moving, the length becomes L prime equal to L naught by gamma. If this is L naught. Similarly, T prime will be T naught times gamma. So what should M be so that the conservation law for momentum holds? And it was a very simple exercise. He just went through this calculation. He said M has to be either gamma times M or 1 by gamma times M. That's the guess that he had because both L and T had similar behaviors, and it was not very difficult to see that M essentially became gamma times M naught, which he said M naught is, then he coined the term, if M naught is what is called the rest mass of a particle. So now mass is mass, the measured mass of a particle depended on the motion, and M is no longer a constant irrespective of how the body is moving, or equivalently irrespective of which frame you look at the body from, because in one frame the body may be at rest, but in another frame the body may be moving. So in that frame, the measured mass is no longer the same as in the previous frame, but it will now be different. So it will be m naught by square root of 1 minus u squared by c squared, where u is the speed of the body's motion in a frame. Okay. So if you have a rod of length L, when I say a rod of length L or L naught, that is when it is at rest. And now if the rod starts moving to the right with a speed u, then L prime will be L naught by square root of 1 minus u squared by c squared. Similarly, sorry, L naught times 1 minus u squared by c squared. And if you have a clock, right, which is moving, t prime will be, that is, if you have an interval delta t, which is the clock's fundamental time, delta t prime will be t naught delta t naught divided by 1 minus u squared by c squared. Okay, this is length contraction, this is time dilation, and similarly m of a body which is when at rest, if the mass is m naught, this also goes like this. Okay, now that already, yeah, go on,
Sir,
Anjane.
in actuality, will the mass of the body change because mass is the amount of matter contained in a body, so that shouldn't
Excellent
change.
question. Excellent question. That's an excellent question. But mass is not just the amount of matter contained in a body. That is what relativity suddenly gives you an insight into. What do we mean by the amount of matter contained in a body? It's a cyclical expression, right? When you say amount, you are actually referring to mass in the classical expression, right?
So, like we can say that 1 mole of
Yeah, but
seed
they're all
has
cyclic. And
12 grams.
if you observe it, the sentence that you're saying is very cyclical. You are actually using the notion of mass, which is a more fundamental notion, to say this sentence, right? When you say the amount of matter, that is the mass. That is why this, this notion of mass being frame dependent was not discovered for several hundred years, because classical intuition doesn't allow us to make such a conclusion. But Einstein had already given up classical intuition when he embarked on the relativistic path, right? So a priori, to him, it did not seem unreasonable that if lengths and times, which were at once considered absolute, could be relative, why not mass? And by using this formula, he recovered the conservation of momentum in all frames. Momentum in all frames. Now I have to add one more thing, where momentum in any given frame is still defined as m times u, but this m is no longer the rest mass of the particle, and it is not a frame independent quantity, but it is a frame dependent quantity called the relativistic mass of the particle. Okay, so we denote it by the letter m, and whenever we want to specifically mention only to the rest mass of the particle, we use the subscript 0. So m naught is the rest mass and m is the. Now this is the definition of momentum even in special relativity, but m should now be understood as a frame dependent quantity. Questions? Now what is m naught? That is the next question. We'll come to that. But before we do that, let us also go along with Einstein and try to come up with expressions for other quantities. We went into momentum, and according to Newton's second law, force is mass times acceleration. This is only one phrasing of the law, but the more fundamental phrasing is this. Force is d by dt, the time variation or the time rate of change. Yes, Anjaney?
Sir, you told that the mass is dependent on the relative speed of the frame.
Correct.
But sir, how are we measuring the mass in that moving frame? We cannot take a weighing balance in that and measure.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's a wonderful question. How do you measure mass in when the object is moving? You measure it via the momentum. You put the particle through a collision process. Okay. Assume the law of conservation of momentum, and from that you can determine the mass, provided you have a definition connecting momentum and mass. That's exactly how you measure
Uh,
mass.
so can't it be like that? The mass is same whether it is rest mass or whether it is moving mass, but the momentum is changing depending on the whether the frame is relative or at rest.
No, the momentum is changing. So again, a very good question, Anjay. So what is happening here is the following. We are retaining the definition of momentum because momentum is defined in a very simple way as mass times velocity, and which is a definition that we have used for, let us say Einstein has himself used for a few hundred, meaning before him, people have used that definition for a couple hundred years, right? There is no a priori reason for you to change that definition. All he's doing is he's noting that you can use the same expression, but this mass is no longer a frame independent quantity like in the Newtonian case, but it's a frame dependent quantity. And once it becomes frame dependent, according to this particular rule, where the mass of a particle which is moving in a frame with a velocity u will be m naught by square root of 1 minus u squared by v squared, u squared by c squared. As long as you apply this rule to write down the mass, conservation of momentum holds.
So what I am suggesting is that we keep the momentum as m times u, but instead of doing m is equals to m naught divided by under root 1 minus u square by c square, we write it m naught multiplied by u divided by under root of 1 minus u square by c square. That is, we change the u by a factor of gamma, not mass.
But see that there is a problem with that, right? U is a kinematic quantity. Okay, U is a kinematic quantity which is related to space-time measurements. You can't arbitrarily change U because the space-time definition of U is fundamental. A particle moving in a particular frame, the velocity of it is defined as the rate of displacement of the particle, right? You can't just change that into something arbitrary. But if you look at which quantity here is not as obvious, it is the mass, because mass is an input. Mass is an abstract quantity compared to velocity. You don't have a theory of mass until you go into quantum physics or whatever, into quantum field theory. There is no theory, it's an input into the theory. It is something that you are putting by hand and you are measuring mass using, for macroscopic objects, using gravity. You measure the weight and acceleration due to gravity is measured separately, and then from there you get the mass. Right? But a priori, there is no easy, simple, fundamental definition of mass like you have for velocity. And that definition of velocity has been retained because of its fundamental kinematic quality. Kinematics is about space-time movement. Dynamics is about quantities like momentum, energy, etc., etc. So these dynamical quantities all involve mass. So any change in the dynamics in the dynamical formalism between Newton and Einstein is actually coming through this notion of mass changing. Okay, so that is what I'm trying to highlight. Is that clear?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah, so the kinematic quantities are not changing in definitions because they are related to space-time measurements, and we have worked out the space-time transformations from one frame to another, and using those, all the transformations for all kinematic quantities will happen. You can, once you know how the space-time coordinates transform, all kinematic quantities can be computed, and we just did that for the various components of velocity. But for mass, you need something, and this is the transformation for mass. This was a discovery by Einstein, who discovered that if this were true, conservation of momentum now holds. And Newton's law, Newton's second law. So now you have this other dynamical quantity called force. Then how do you write Newton's second law in the relativistic language? So then he said, yeah, you just write it as d by dt of the momentum. That's all. But this will not be m du by dt because m is also a function of, this will be m naught u by d by dt. So if your u is changing, m is also changing. So this is not as simple as just taking out m from this derivative because it's a constant. You can take m naught, but not m. Okay. So this is the definition of the relativistic momentum is m times u, where m is the relativistic mass. Can we do the same with kinetic energy? So let's now look at the other important quantity called kinetic energy. And according to Newton, the work done, okay, this is called the work energy theorem, the work done on an object to move from point 1 to point 2 will be equal to the change in its kinetic energy, where kinetic energy is half m u squared. Okay, the change in the kinetic energy will be the change in this quantity. And how do you get this formula half mu squared, you say delta work will be integral say 1 to 2 f dot dl, and you write this will be dp by dt dot dl, and then you write m du by dt dot dl, and you write dl as dl like this, and then you transfer this here and it becomes mdu dot du, sorry, u, not du, mdu dot u, because dl by dt is basically u. Oops. Sorry. So this is, I'll call it m naught for clarity, and then you integrate it and this becomes half mu squared 1 to 2, the difference, half mu1 u2 squared minus half mu1 squared. This is how in classical mechanics, in Newtonian formalism, this is how the notion of kinetic energy comes out. And the work done is related to the forces acting on the system, and that is usually from some potential energy. Forces are due to potential energy, and that action of force is changing the kinetic energy of the particle, and therefore you get this. You can do the same, okay? You can start. So Einstein derived the kinetic energy expression using the same principle. Instead of f, he again wrote dp by dt dot dl. This will be integral 1 to 2. dp will be now d by dt of m times u, but m is also a time varying quantity, dot dl. And he did the same thing. He basically wrote this as dm times u bar plus m times du bar, okay, integral dot with u bar. And then using m equal to m naught by square root of 1 minus u squared by c squared, and you can write this as m squared will be m naught squared by 1 minus u squared by c squared, and then writing m squared minus m squared c squared minus m squared u squared will be m naught squared c squared, right? And you can then m squared c squared will be equal to m naught squared u squared plus m naught squared c squared, and then take the derivative of this, so it will be 2m c squared will be equal to m naught squared 2u du plus, sorry, I wrote something wrong. This is not m naught squared, this is m squared. Yeah. Okay, 2mc squared m naught squared, correct, m squared minus m squared u squared plus m naught squared c squared, right? And then yes, correct, yeah. And this one, there will be another term coming from this is m naught squared, sorry, I should write it as m squared 2u plus 2m dm u squared plus 0, okay, because this term is a constant. M naught is not a changing quantity, it is a constant. And you can now divide everything by 2m. 2m is common everywhere, so we just divide it. We get c squared equal to 2mu du plus 2u squared dm. Oh, sorry, 2c squared. So I can also cancel out 2. So I get 2c squared equal to mu du plus u squared dm. Now look at this. Mu du plus u squared dm. That's exactly what is inside the integral. So what we get now is basically c squared. That integrand is basically c squared. There is nothing, and 1 to 2 dm, right? And if the particle is at rest initially, this mass is m naught, and if the particle is moving with a velocity v, we say the mass is m. Therefore, delta w, which is delta k, the kinetic energy of the particle, becomes mc squared minus m naught c squared. Okay, where we know that m is m naught by 1 minus u squared by c squared times c squared minus m naught c squared. Therefore, this is m naught c squared times gamma minus 1, where gamma is now 1 by square root of 1 minus u squared by c squared, which is not the frame velocity, mind you. This is we are looking at everything from one frame, but the particle is moving with a velocity u. That is what this is. Okay, so kinetic energy now becomes m naught c squared 1 by square root of 1 minus u squared by c squared minus 1. And you can easily see when u is much less than c, k basically becomes m naught c squared times 1 minus 1 by 2. Okay, sorry, 1 plus 1 by 2 u squared by c squared minus 1. And this is precisely half m naught u squared, which is the Newtonian result. So momentum is m times u, kinetic energy is m naught c squared times 1 by square root of 1 minus u squared by c squared minus 1. This is the definition of kinetic energy. And now we check out the definition of half mu squared for kinetic energy, because that is only approximately true, if at all. Okay, so this becomes now the definition of kinetic energy. And m naught c squared is called, in that case, when u is 0. Okay, when u is 0, the kinetic energy is 0, as you would want it. But what is this m naught c squared quantity? This is called the rest energy of the particle. M naught is the rest mass, and m naught c squared is the rest energy of the particle. Now, this is something that comes out of the relativistic formalism, that there is a rest energy for the particle, which in the light of quantum theory is not so unreasonable, because all these bodies, all physical objects that you are looking at, are made up of a large number of atomic and subatomic particles, all interacting and held together using internal forces of different kinds. And those forces are holding it together. So there is always some energy which the particle has even when it is at rest. So what is 0 is not the total energy, but only the kinetic energy of the particle, which is 0. Okay, so now we now introduce something called the total energy. The total energy of a particle is now given to be m times c squared, where m is the relativistic mass. This is okay. This is going to be the total energy of the particle. Remember that kinetic energy is going to be, this is, we denote it by E. So this E equal to mc square, that m is not the same m as we understand as the rest mass, but that m is the relativistic mass. And this is by far the most famous, most famous equation in physics, in my opinion. Even bus conductors in Bengaluru know this, because there is this building called the Dell EMC building in Marathalli, Mahadevpura, and they all call it EMC squared building. There is nowhere, it's not a Dell EMC squared building, it's a Dell EMC building, but for some reason they all call it EMC squared. because they somehow heard through some means they heard this equation equal to mc squared. So whenever they say EMC, they can't stop saying mc squared. So that's how popular this equation is. So E equal to mc squared should now be understood not as just the mass that we know of in our daily lives, which in relativity would be called m naught, but it would be mc squared will be the relativistic mass times c squared. C is anyway a fundamental constant, and that's just a number. Theoretical physicists often set c equal to 1, and quantum field theory people set h bar and c equal to 1. So now that basically means that the smallest action that we know and the fastest speed that we know are both set equal to 1, and you can't obviously design reactors using such units, but for doing theory it is very, very good. All right, so kinetic energy then becomes mc squared minus m naught c squared. That's what kinetic energy is, right? If you look at this term, the first term here is mc squared, second term is minus m naught c squared. So this is m minus m naught c squared. All right, and now, okay, you are deriving a whole bunch of these formulae. What is the legitimacy of all this? The legitimacy for any physical theory is in experiment. Every one of these is validated by experiment. There was, until this point, there was no explanation for the binding energy of nuclei. There was, there was no simple explanation. But now you can predict what happens to a particular nucleus if say, or what happens to if you collide two particles with certain rest masses. Now we have to keep using the word rest mass, because in the light of relativity the word mass just by itself doesn't mean anything. In fact, when we say mass without qualifying it further, we usually refer to the relativistic mass. Okay, so that is the change in language that happened post relativity. So this is this. Now you can take these two equations, E equal to mc squared and P equal to mu, okay, and use the definition of and eliminate u from this, okay, and you can, this is a very simple two-step calculation, and you will see that E squared will come out to be P squared C squared plus m naught squared C power 4. Okay, just use these two equations and eliminate u from both of them. That's it. That's what. And remember that this m here also has m naught and u in it. So you have to basically eliminate those. And what you get is this equation. This gives you, this is called, in general, energy momentum relations. Energy momentum relations are very important in physics. For example, in classical mechanics, pre-Einstein, E is p squared by 2m. This is a parabolic EP relation, right? Because if you plot it, E versus P, in condensed matter physics, these are also called, in any wave theory, in fact, EP relations are also called dispersion relations. Why? Because a dispersion relation is omega k. Omega is frequency and k is the wave number or inverse wavelength. Okay, so omega k relations are typically called dispersion relations in wave theory of light. etc., etc. It's because there are dispersive media. Like for example, if you take a prism made of some kind of glass or some crystal, it behaves in a dispersive manner that the refractive index is a function of its frequency, of the frequency of the light that's passing through it. So these kind of relations are called dispersion relations, and energy momentum relations are interchangeably sometimes referred to as dispersion relations in physics, because thanks to de Broglie, energy is related to frequency, momentum is related to wave number k, which is the yeah. So if you hear the word dispersion relation, in relativity, this is what the dispersion relation is for a massive particle. Now, when you set m naught equal to 0, all massless particles essentially have a linear dispersion relation, which relativity immediately predicts. Okay? All right. So we have looked at a whole bunch of important results today pertaining to the dynamical quantities in relativity. Okay? And in fact, special relativity, if you noticed, without deriving, okay? So we have a particle transformation of quantities. This has been our theme. If you understand what we have been doing, you take x, y, z and t in frame S, you defined x prime, y prime, z prime, t prime, and this is done according to Lorentz transformations. Okay. Can I take 5 more minutes and try to kind of summarize what we have done so far so that we set the theme for the next class? All right. So actually, no, let us stop here and we'll start here next class. That's okay. Okay, so I will pause here for today. We did something quite important. We derived a few very famous equations in relativity. And in the final class, we will take up the basic ideas of general relativity and why the need for general relativity in the first place. All right. Okay, I'm stopping here, stopping the recording.
Thank you, sir.
All right, folks, I'll see you on Wednesday, same time.